Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about this. This is the Xbox HD Plus. But before we get into all the details of that, if you could do me a favor, please like this video, comment on this video, subscribe if you're not subscribed, go in the description, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, all that sort of stuff, Patreon, whatever. And if you don't mind, check out my new channel called Flying and Eating, which is all about adventuring and flying and eating and stuff. Anyway, thank you for that. Now, moving on to the point of the video, we're going to be talking about the Xbox HD Plus, which is basically an HDMI output native for the original Xbox, this console right here. Huge shout out before we get started though, to StoneAgeGamer.com. I'm even repping their shirt because they are super cool guys. They were cool enough to send this to me for free for the purposes of review, so now we can all enjoy it together. Now here's the thing. This is not a video about how to install one of these or anything like that, or even the process of setting it all up. Basically what happened was they asked me if I was interested in reviewing this, and I said yes, but the problem was I can't possibly install it. I don't have the skill set for that, so I would have to wait until I could get my friend to hook it up, and set it all up for me. And basically they went don't worry about it, and they just sent me a pre-installed unit. So that's how you know that they're very cool. So yes, this Xbox now has this installed in it, and you can see the first and most obvious change without ever turning it on is the back, where it now natively has an HDMI port as well as what looks like a 3D printed kind of mount to secure it, which makes sense. However, it's obvious then you have to sacrifice the original AV out or component out port in order to do that. So now the only video option out of this thing is the HDMI port. Which is really not a big deal. But there's a couple of things you need to know beforehand if you have any intention of doing this. One, this is very much not a novice type of installation. I could never possibly do this. You have to have legit skills to do it. The other thing is that the console basically also has to be modified in order to run it. When you buy these kits, I believe you also have the option to buy the Xenium chip to go with it, which means the Xbox needs to be modded in order to access the additional features and all that sort of stuff. Now, to be very technical in the sense of technicalities, not logistics, it will technically work without a console being modded, but officially that's not supported by MakeMHZ or Megahertz, I'm assuming. It's not supported by them, and none of the official features and all that sort of stuff can work. It's you would actually get a signal, but it's not ideal, and it's highly, highly, highly not recommended to do. But I imagine if you're the type of person who's willing to get in there and put this chip in, you're probably also the guy who's got the skill set to install a mod chip, and you would see the benefits therein. So I don't really see that being as much of a problem. Once you're in there, you can do all the normal stuff when you modify an original Xbox. Recommended to put in a better hard drive. This one actually has a 2 terabyte hard drive inside of it instead of the original Xbox's default 8 gig or whatever it was. Big difference. But anyway, we're not approaching it from that whole standpoint. I'm literally just looking at it once the unit is done and set up, what is it like to use it, and what is the point? So first, I think it's very important to understand the video output options that have already existed with the original Xbox natively. It shipped with composite cables that were gross, they were terrible, but it's how most of us used it. Microsoft originally offered other options. You could use it with S-Video if you wanted to, which gave you a little bit of an improvement. In Europe, you had access to the SCART cables, though ironically over there you didn't have access to the high def mode, so it really wasn't exactly an improvement. And Microsoft here was cool enough to give us the component cables, the official set, and then there was a whole bunch of third-party ones. The third-party ones are bad for the most part, so don't get them if you don't have to. But the official set is quite nice, but now very expensive. Not as bad as say the GameCube component cables were, but very expensive for what they should be. So a lot of people turn to those cheaper component cable alternatives, and I don't recommend those. I've done whole videos on that. They're just built like junk. Don't get those. They're not all made the same. Just because they are component cables doesn't mean they offer the same quality of image. So more modern solutions have come along in the forms of HDMI adapters, things that you just plug into the component jack and it just gives you HDMI out. I've done videos on the Hyperkin ones, the Pound ones. Basically, I said at the time, and I maintain it, that I do not recommend those. They're just cheap component to HDMI converters, and they don't do a very good job of it because, in my opinion, the component output port is solid when running ideal, meaning running the official cables, everything. It can look, at this level. The problem with most of the HDMI converters is they go like, well, we're not going to quite reach that level. We're going to take that signal and downgrade it a bit for convenience, but now it has an HDMI signal. So really, they don't even reach as good as the potential of the component cable, so I don't recommend them. The one that did, and I made a video about it, was this. This is the one by Chimeric. This is the only HDMI native output cable I would recommend for the original Xbox, because it's just a straight one-to-one pass-through. It's exactly the image that you're getting off the console. The device in itself doesn't create any problems or downgrade anything, which is nice. But the issues with this are twofold. One that's the fault of the creator and one that is not. The fault of the creator is that he's just a guy making these, and so he only makes like 8 a month. So getting one of these is almost impossible. Like, I was lucky enough that I was able to get one off his website, you know, just random good luck. And so I bought it and I did the video on it. But most people at the time were like, well, that's great and all, but I can't buy it. And to this day, you still basically can't buy it. So as much as I'd love to recommend this as the best output option, I can't, just because of how hard it is to actually get one. But if you actually do get one, it's nice. But it does have other downsides. And the other one that it has, which is not his fault, is that component signals in the original Xbox, much like the GameCube or any really component output system, have an inherent flaw, which is the internals of the console. Essentially, we can say they think in digital, and they want to output digital, but through component they can't. What happens is you get a digital signal and it has to downgrade to analog before up-converting right back to digital. That little wave, if you will, creates video noise. So this is an example of the original Xbox running with this device, and keep in mind this is the best you previously could do, and you can see right here when it boots up there's a little bit of like distortion in the background on the TV there, right? That's just the camera aimed at the TV. I get it. We'll do captured footage later, I promise. But you see that little distortion. Now the benefit of this thing is that it's a pure digital signal. It takes the signal that's digital originally and just sends that straight out. Thus that noise is gone. So this is the same type of boot up moment on the original Xbox. Granted it's short, as you can see, but that noise is completely gone. So if you're the guy jumping from, hey, I already have even this, would this be an improvement? Yes, because all the digital distortion is gone. That's the first and most obvious thing. And if you're the guy coming from like composite cables, this will be like a generational leap forward for you, buddy. So that's first and foremost. Now, that's default right out of the box. Now this thing actually has software built in. Well, I should say there's software for it. That's actually that's the biggest reason you need a modified Xbox, is that the original Xbox does not natively have any way to adjust the settings on this device, because certainly Microsoft did not, you know, support this, because this is third-party thing that came out, you know, 20 years later. But there is software that the engineer created, and it can be downloaded and installed onto a modified Xbox, which it has been done here. Now, if you run that software, and as you can see here, it's very basic-looking software. There's really nothing all that special about it. It has resolution settings. I set it to 720p. We'll talk more about it in a bit. It also has some aspect ratio options, which I basically tell it not to force anything, just keep it at auto. And then as well as you've got some more advanced settings as far as like the X and Y axis conversions and all that. And then you also have audio settings. As well as finally the ability to update the thing, which is kind of neat. You can connect online and it can see if there's any sort of updates, and if it's there, it'll run them. But that's about it. Like, once it's already running, you're good to go. But that software is very key to get everything kind of universal. So now I said I keep the thing set at 720p. Now there's a reason for that. The original Xbox natively supported 480i, 480p, 720p, and 1080i. I also believe the European one supported 576i and 576p. But I can't test that particular setting. We'll get back to that later. But anyway, so it supported all those. Now, the way the original Xbox worked is it just took whatever you told it to do, and if the game supported it, it would just go to that highest point. So 1080i, I think, is where most people would want to set it to, but the reason I don't do that is twofold. One, the original Xbox only had 5 games that actually used the 1080i mode. And secondly, the 1080i mode, to my eye, if you ask me, actually looks worse than the 720p mode, because interlaced footage always looks worse, in my opinion. And the same applies when it's actually displayed on a television. For those who are not totally familiar with the difference between I and P, I stands for interlaced, P stands for progressive. So basically an interlaced image is like, you're getting half the image at a time, and it's constantly like flipping, like so that, you know, the persistence of the human eye, it kind of sees an entire image, but that's how you get these like jagged edges and stuff that appear. Whereas a progressive scan gives you every single frame of resolution all consistently at the same time. But that's harder to do, so typically the dimensions will be smaller. Hence 720p is smaller dimensions while being more consistent. 1080i is bigger dimension, but inconsistent. So it's a personal preference, but I keep it at 720p. So that way, plus the 5 games, like Enter the Matrix being the most obvious one, that actually support 1080i, they also all support 720p. So basically what I'm saying is, set it to 720p and you don't really have to do anything special. The Xbox will always default to the highest supported resolution up to 720p and will always look the best. Because the only other thing that ever tends to support 720p or 1080i is the dashboards for modified Xboxes and all those apps. But you don't want to start introducing those to having 1080i modes because it just won't look as good. But that's, again, opinion. So, but if you have like a native 480p game and you pop one in to the 720p Xbox, it will just play it at its maximum resolution, which is 480p. So I think that that is something that might be interesting to people that I think is worth questioning. So you might look at this device and think, okay, so now there's an HDMI port, so like everything's just going to run in 1080p or 720p, like all the games just support high def modes. No. What happens is, as I said, the native set 1080i games, if you set 720p, they'll just play 720p. A game that always supports 720p, then there are some, I think there was like 80 games on the original Xbox that natively have a 720p support. Those will also run in 720p. And I believe you can even, there are some games that you can like hack them a bit and force them to run in 720p, though that's a completely different discussion. Those too would then run. The majority of the original Xbox games, even like infamous ones like Halo 2, only run in 480p, and therefore that's what they will run at. What's actually the most interesting to me is the 480i games. There's a whole like slew of 480i games, which are maybe like 100 of them out of like the nearly 1,000 game library run at 480i, which is a very annoying little resolution because it really did not age well and it doesn't look good on modern setups. So that's the one time where this thing actually auto-adjusts for it. It will force every 480i game into 480p, thus making it look a lot better. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. Now, this is a stock Xbox. You can see up there in the corner running Catwoman, which is a terrible Halle Berry movie game. But this is one of the games that supports 480i only. But now if you run it on the modded Xbox with the HDMI output, boom, it says it's in 480p now. So that's great, because not only does it actually correct that problem, it makes everything more universal and so on and so forth, but the games actually look a lot better. But that has an added perk that we'll get to in a second. But let's talk a little bit about some of this gameplay footage. Let's look over it. So let's start with Catwoman, since we're already there. Again, here's an example of the game running in 480i. This is off of a stock Xbox with the component adapter. Now, it is not the prettiest image, as you can tell. Little dark, little gross, but technically this is just what it outputs. This is just what it looks like. Now, if you run the exact same moment of the game in 480p through the HDMI output, you can see that it is instantly cleaner. It's not anything super crazy to write home about, but it is a definite improvement. Where it can be a crazy improvement is if you add this little device called the M Classic. Yes, we'll get back to that in a second. But if you add that, you can see that's a stark contrast of difference right there. So I think that that's phenomenal. Now, this is the M Classic. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about this because I've done entire videos on it and reviews of it, and that's not really the point of this video, of course. But I will say this. If you have one of these, or you have the HDMI modified Xbox, these two things together are a match made in heaven. Stone Age Gamer also sells these in addition. I would say, I don't think they have a bundle for this, but I would say, guys at Stone Age Gamer, bundle these together because this is ridiculous. One of the big benefits is now that everything on this supports 480p native, this automatically kicks in and enhances every single game to an upscaled 1080p. If you're not familiar with what this does, it upscales, it does anti-aliasing, hence that more buffered outlook. It does color enhancement, all sorts of benefits that man, it's just crazy how much better this can make the original Xbox look. Like, this works really well with the Dreamcast and really well with the GameCube. With the Xbox HD Plus, this really shines. I would say that the two of them combined is like a powerhouse of amazing for the original Xbox. But let's take something more standard, because again, this is not about the M Classic. So let's run some Halo 2. We've got Halo 2 running again in the standard HD mode. So this is 480p native. Now, it's important to understand, and I didn't adjust this. See how the aspect ratio is wrong? It's 16:9. This is something that the original Xbox does, even does it with this HDMI output. Despite the fact that this is actually a 4:3 game, it still outputs in a stretched out widescreen. It's not really supposed to look like this. It's supposed to look more adjusted. And it can if you set it differently. So again, this is by default. This is with the component cables. But now if you switched over to the HD Plus version, the signal is cleaner. It no longer has the distortion as in the video signal anymore. So it is an overall improvement, but still has the aspect ratio problem. But again, if you attach the M Classic and you set it into its retro mode, well, then there you go. Like, it's again almost like a generational leap forward, which is, I think, phenomenal. But okay, you guys are getting the sense of it. You understand. Why don't we try something a little different? Let's run a 720p native game. So we've got Justice League Heroes, which is the Superman Batman thing. This is it, again, running stock right now with the HD Plus. There's no changes, whatever. This is direct capture, which is also a game that natively supports widescreen. So it looks quite good. But again, if you actually want to do this and you fire up the M Classic with it, then boom, you get an even sharper and cleaner difference. So you get like I don't know. I just think it's phenomenal. I know that wasn't the point of this, but that was one of the things I really discovered about it was the video signal off of this thing is far superior than the default modes. Even the best of the best that has previously existed cannot compete with the native HDMI output board. They just can't, and that makes sense because of this direct digital connection, as well as the fact that it natively corrects the 480i problem. But where it really connects for me is if you put the M Classic in there, those two combined are a force of crazy awesome. So basically all this boils down to is the only negatives to this is really, honestly, the installation process and that whole setup phase, which I didn't have to do. So you have to understand that I'm a little biased in the sense that I just had to review it as a final product. And from the end user perspective, it was great. Once I kind of, tinkered a little and got everything up and running, it was great. I cannot stress enough, by the way, as a positive, how much I love that they use a full-size HDMI port. I mean, that's like huge. I'm so tired of like micro. That thing annoys me. So you just plug in standard, you're good to go. But I will say this, much like the DC Digital or the Dreamcast one, I should say, the signal off of it is not always the strongest because it was never really meant to run HDMI. So as a result, you'll occasionally get like flickering. But if you plug directly into a TV as opposed to a switch box, that's severely reduced. But if you run things through a switch box, I notice good luck. Like a lot of the time it just won't work without some sort of HDMI repeater. So keep that in mind. If you're going to do this, connect it directly to the television. I wanted to test what it would do with PAL games, which is why I was talking about 576i and 576p games. I was wondering if 576i games would auto adjust to 576p or they would convert to 480p. However, while I do have a pretty extensive Xbox original library of PAL exclusive games, I couldn't find one that natively supported 576i. I tried doing some research on that, but I wasn't really coming up with any results. So if somebody knows one and can tell me, I would be happy to try it. But again, the only ones I have are the exclusives. I don't have like the ones that came out here and in Europe. So I'm a little limited in what I can actually check with that. But yeah, so final thoughts are, it's great if you want to play Catwoman in HD, as I know we've all wanted to. I mean, really, that was the only reason we didn't like this game or that movie, was because this game ran at 480i, obviously. No, and also, this is just an example because I remember it ran at 480i. But there are a whole bunch of original Xbox games that are stuck like this, so now they are liberated, they are free, and they can run much better than they ever have. And if you want to take, obviously, your Halo 2s and all your more better, frankly, original Xbox games, they've never looked better. And then, of course, the 720p games are even sharper than they've ever been. But I will say this, as much as I do love it, and I think that it is a massive improvement, I have to be very clear. The M Classic is really what makes it a difference maker. Without it, it's more subtle. You might notice it in a direct comparison, or if you're coming from something like composite or S-Video, or maybe even if you were coming from like crappy component cables, then it'd be like, oh, wow. But if you're like already coming from this, while the digital distortion being removed, or the distortion, I should say, the analog distortion being removed in favor of a digital signal is nice, I don't know how much of the upgrade is worth to you, and that ultimately is a decision that you have to make. But if you want to do it, there's a link in the description. You can buy the kit yourself. Stone Age Gamer even does an installation service as well. You can mail them your Xbox, and they'll do it for you. I maintain that they should probably bundle this with it at some point, but yeah, the only real negative I can see, and I don't even really consider it a negative, but I guess I just have to be as objective as possible, is that technically you do have to sacrifice the original component jack on the back, which means if you were the CRT type of person, obviously this will no longer work. But this is really meant to take the original Xbox and bring it into modern times as opposed to playing it in the retro style. So if you're the type of person who's like, hey man, I'm going to run emulators and all that sort of stuff on it, and you are still like the idea of running an original Xbox on a CRT, then this obviously wouldn't be for you. But where I would recommend it is the actual legitimate original Xbox library on a modern setup. Then you're really onto something. So yeah, I think that will about do it. If you want to check it out, please do so. Link in the description to Stone Age Gamer. I want to thank them, of course, for supplying the original Xbox for the purposes of review. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you could please like, comment, subscribe. As always, check me out on social media stuff, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, blah, blah, blah. And of course, the Flying and Eating channel if you want to see me get even fatter. But anyway, thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.